So welcome to Listening Matters, Bridging Across Differences Through Peaceful Dialogue. Listen First Project and Peace Through Action USA are co-presenting this event this evening. Next slide, please. And I'm Bob Reig. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Peace Through Action USA. Joining me as presenters today are Graham Bodie, Chief Listening Officer of Listen First Project, and Jessica Harding, Peace Agent with Peace Through Action. Next slide, please. So on the event agenda, Graham's going to describe the polarization problem in the United States and how listening with empathy is a pathway out of that challenge. I'll briefly describe how dialogue and deliberation processes are a type of listening method that's well suited to addressing polarization. And I'll familiarize you with some of the main dialogue processes available to us and how to connect to dialogues in your community. Jessica will tell you about the dialogue work underway in Calvert County, Maryland. That's a location where Peace Through Action has a community peace project underway. Then Graham's going to alert you to national listening opportunities upcoming in April. And both of us will conclude by pointing you to our own listening and dialogue resources. Next slide, please. So by the end of the session, we hope you'll be able to see how listening is a fundamental element to bridging differences, including political and public policy differences. We hope you'll be able to understand a bit about structured dialogue processes, find a local civic dialogue opportunity and how to get instruction for leading one yourself, get involved with America Talks and the National Week of Conversation, and obtain resources from Listen First and Peace Through Action. So I'm now going to turn the presentation to Graham of the Listen First Project. Next.
Thank you so much, Bob, and thank you everybody for being here this evening. I know you've got a lot of options of where to be. For instance, I could be in a closet here in any minute now. I'm from Oxford, Mississippi. I'm a professor of integrated marketing communication at the university here, and we're having some tornado warnings. So just a heads up that I might have to call in on my phone at any moment. The hat that I wear tonight is as Chief Listening Officer of Listen First Project. And as we say in our mission, we lead the collaborative movement to heal America by building relationships and bridging divides. And we do this by aggregating, aligning, and amplifying the work of over 400 organizations that do this work. Listen First Project itself doesn't program its own workshops or dialogue events unless it's in partnership with another organization. And all of these organizations are transforming division and contempt into connection and understanding. And so what we serve as in the field that we might call interpersonal bridge building is that we serve as a backbone organization for the collective impact movement that we call the Listen First Coalition. And those are, again, those 400 plus partners, and we aggregate, amplify, and align those efforts into large-scale national collective campaigns, strategies, innovations that serve the entire field and attempt to allow for deeper connection and cross promotion and co-creation of events and campaigns. So if you'll go to that next slide, our North Star, if you will, what we are attempting to wrestle with on a daily basis is toxic polarization, which is defined as the way that we demonize each other across difference. So what we're not doing is trying to get rid of healthy conflict. We're not trying to tell Democrats to become Republicans or Republicans to become Democrats or independents to choose a party or libertarians to give up their belief in personal freedom or socialists to give up their belief in collective community building. What we are saying is that we need to understand each other's humanity better. So we are not the curators of some mythical common ground in the middle compromise position for every issue that you might think about, because I'm not sure what the middle ground is for racism versus anti-racism, for instance. There really is no compromised position, but rather I want to know about your life and your experiences, and I would hope that you would want to understand my life and my experiences so that we might learn about why we have come to different views of the world and what we might do with those different views of the world toward action. And so regardless of the source that you read, most people believe that toxic polarization is a problem. A hefty third of Americans who identify as Democrat or Republican believe that violence could be justified to advance their party's political goals. We believe that other people, and I put that in air quotes, in America are the biggest threat to our country. And we see the other party, if we're a Democrat or Republican, as evil. And we hardly know those people. Very few of us have friends on the other side of the aisle. And most of us now live in landslide counties where Democrats and Republican presidential candidates win by 20 or more points. But there's hope, and there's hope found in books and documentaries and studies and in organizations that basically say that most people are scared for our country and most people want to do something about that divisiveness. Next slide. What we propose as a solution, not the solution, and maybe not even the best solution in many cases, is to listen across difference, to seek first to understand another person's experiences and positions and them as a person before you begin to judge or otherwise evaluate what they must be like or why they must believe what they believe. And so I want to compare and contrast a listen first position to what we might call a perspective taking or a pure empathy position. And so scholars have identified two distinct ways to take the perspective of another person. You can either imagine yourself in that person's shoes, or what we call imagine self perspective taking, or you can think about how that person feels by just imagining their perspective, or imagine other perspective taking. And both of these types of perspective taking, both of these types of cognitive empathy lead to empathic concern, to compassionate and tender feelings toward other people. But imagine self perspective taking, when you try to imagine how you yourself would feel if you were experiencing what has happened to the other person, additionally leads to higher levels of personal distress and negative self-focused affect. So there's a disconnect between trying to put yourself in their shoes versus wearing your own shoes. And both of those ways of taking perspective of others seems to be problematic in some ways. So the situation that I like to think about is, imagine it's your best friend's birthday and you want to get them a very special gift, something they'll really enjoy. How do you go about finding that perfect gift? You can imagine you yourself, how you would feel if you received that gift, or you can imagine how the other people might feel about that gift. Or the third option, and the one that I believe is the better option, is to, in fact, ask them what they might want for their birthday. What kind of present might make them happy, and actually listen to that story and earnestly attempt to fully understand from their perspective why that particular gift might make them happy. And so the point is very well said by a scholar by the name of Epley in his book Mind-Wise. If you'll turn to this next slide, he says that others' minds will never be an open book. The secret to understanding each other better seems to come not through an increased ability to read body language or improvised perspective taking, but rather through the hard relational work of putting people in a position where they can tell you their minds openly and honestly. If we want to understand what's on the mind of another person, the best our mortal senses can do may be to rely on our ears more than our inferences. And so if you'll go to this last slide, the way that I like to put this is that if you were going to take away one thing from this literature, is that people behave for a reason. People don't behave haphazardly. People don't behave for oftentimes reasons that we assume they behave, but rather people behave for reasons. And listening with empathy means discovering that reason. It begins, first of all, with an attitude of curiosity and leads to behavior that is discovery oriented. In other words, asking open-ended questions, listening deeply to the answers to those questions, oftentimes paraphrasing not the exact words that they used like a parrot might do, but to gather the gist of the conversation, to feed back to them your understanding. Because rather than listening from a point of view of their shoes or my shoes, my argument is that we ought to take off our shoes and do a little bit of barefoot listening, listening with no shoes. Bob?
Thanks, Graham. So it's my turn now. Hello, I'm going to give you a quick introduction to Peace Through Action USA, and then move on with the program. So we're a mission to achieve peace between people and within communities in the United States by promoting caring action. And we deliver on that mission by activating and equipping Americans to implement practical, peaceful solutions to aggression and violence. And we do that two ways. One, through education and calls to action for the general public, such as through events like this. And two, through intensive peace building activities in communities of focus. Our first being in Calvert County, Maryland, and Jessica will speak to that momentarily. Next slide, please. So there are a number of solutions to the polarization problem that Graham just described. For example, each of us could self-regulate our own discourse in person and online, such as refrain from a snarky jab at someone we disagree with, or sharing the grumpy meme that's circulating in social media, right? We could not do those things. Speaking of social media, the owners of those companies could increase their removal of posts that spread disinformation and misinformation, which basically have the intention of stoking division and hate or firing up the fringes. But the solution to polarization that we want to elevate today is what I like to call generally dialogue and deliberation processes. So we use that catch-all term to describe interpersonal activities that have purposes of culture exchange, mutual appreciation, idea exchange, bridging differences, and reaching common understanding. And sometimes the processes are working with more than one of those purposes in mind. So dialogue and deliberation processes aren't random encounters, but they're structured activities or events. They typically follow some orderly sequence of steps, and they're typically laid out in some instructions. There might be scripts for process leaders to follow. There's guides, there's other support materials. So these tend to be robust offerings. So these processes may or may not have a facilitator. Some of them are designed to be homework that you can do with another person on your own. Others need a more of a central facilitator. Some of them are designed for one-to-one dialogue. Others are set up for small group. Others use a big conversation format. These processes can take place in person or virtually. We've seen an increase in the virtual format during COVID, and I expect that format to persist. Generally, these processes do not require participants to possess a particular subject or skill expertise. They tend to be more open enrollment. Come and bring what you bring and let's get it out there. What is expected of participants in these processes is that participants enter the dialogue and deliberation willing to listen, because after all, listening matters. So the next slide, please. So this slide illustrates that there are many dialogue and deliberation processes already established and in use today. Some of them focus on relationship building generally, such as authentic revolution activities. Others have civic dialogue as their specific intent. Braver Angels would be an example of that. And truly what's listed here just scratches the surface. As Graham mentioned, the Listen First Coalition has over 400 member organizations, some of which offer their own processes, others that use processes of others and implement them in their communities or states. But nonetheless, this slide is an illustration of how much is available to us. If you have a favorite dialogue process of your own that you've used or that you teach, or familiar with one that's not listed here on this slide, feel free to type it in the chat just to enlarge our understanding of what's out there. But the point I'm trying to make with this slide is that there's really no excuse not to choose dialogue and deliberation as a practical solution to polarization affecting the United States. There's plenty of organizations with processes that are just waiting for more of us to adopt them and put them into action. The next slide, please. Which leads to answering a question that some of you might have come into the event wanting answered, or now that Graham and I have maybe perked your interest, you want to learn more. And that question would be, how do I get involved in this dialogue and deliberation stuff? Well, to join a dialogue, look no further than Citizen Connect. That's a website, address on the slide here. This is an ever-growing inventory of organizations who offer dialogue and deliberation processes, as well as the specific events that they offer. And you can search the Citizen Connect database by topic or by work area, keyword or event date. And also note that some of the events listed in this repository are virtual, so they're accessible regardless of your location. Others you might find in the inventory by typing the name of your location or the state in the keyword search. And then some other ways to go, another way to go about finding a dialogue opportunity in your community would be to check event listings provided through print or online news media, or your local library sometimes keeps that kind of list. Subscribe to neighborhood email distribution groups or Nextdoor or other kind of platforms where neighbors share information. Certainly follow event postings that pop up in your social media, and even announcements that come from your local government if they're either sponsoring a dialogue or uplifting one that's being done by a community partner. And then if you want to organize a dialogue in your community, and by community I mean that could be your neighborhood, it could be your congregation, it could be your school community, could be a workplace, or really any other target audience. I assure you that many of the dialogue organizations that I've listed earlier and others like them have resources to help you set up and lead your own. So yeah, they have recipe books basically with the scripts, with the sample invitation letters, with the what to do if there's a challenge that occurs in the session. There's plenty of material to follow if you're ready to, like, oh, I really want to do one of these in my own community and I haven't seen it scheduled by somebody else. So with that, we'll now turn to my colleague, Jessica Harding, to provide an example of dialogue in action.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Harding. I'm the project manager of the Calvert Peace Project. And like Bob said, this is Peace Through Action's first community peace project. And it's located in Calvert County, which is in Southern Maryland. So our mission is to promote peaceful action and to provide opportunities for people to come together around civic and social issues. And since our project began, we have had a lot of support from the Calvert Library System. They have been great partners in helping me get this project off the ground. And one event we have been working on together is a dialogue event that is coming up on April 21st. And the library initiated this when they received a grant called the Libraries Transforming Communities Grant. So since then, we have partnered with some really great local organizations, such as the Big Conversation, Calvert Mediation Center, the Calvert Interfaith Council, and both the Calvert Democrats and the Calvert Republicans. Yeah, so I'd like to take a moment to uplift one of the organizations that I just mentioned, the Big Conversation, because they have been doing this work for over a decade now. After they learned about the necessity for civic dialogue in our country, they took action by bringing national issues to their local context. And their model is to spend 6 months doing research and gathering stories by interviewing people on the impact of the issue that they're focusing on in that particular year. Then they organize a big community dialogue where they have a small group discussions that are facilitated by trained mediators. And their aim really is to develop trust in order to have meaningful conversations. And they stress the importance of deep listening. And their success really speaks for itself. They now have over 300 people show up to their annual conversations. And over the past few years, they have been focusing on dismantling racism and privilege in Southern Maryland. So I suggest you take a look at their website to learn more about the work that they do. And I plan to include this in a follow-up email that I'll send out at the end of the week. So back to our event on the 21st, which is called Productive Community Conversation. And the format will open with a guest speaker who has built her career around teaching people how to have difficult conversations civilly. And we'll have small breakout groups where we'll use a dialogue process called the Harwood method. And the Harwood method is another dialogue model that leads groups through a community visioning process and essentially asks 4 different questions. What kind of community do you want to live in? Why is that important to you? How is that different from how you see things now? And what are some of the things that need to happen to create that kind of change? So at our event, we'll be answering those questions, and then we'll brainstorm specific topics to focus on in our follow-up discussions that will take place later in the fall. So following this dialogue event, the Calvert Peace Project has again partnered with the Mediation Center, and we'll be facilitating a training that dives deeper into reflective listening. And we'll also teach skills in transformative facilitation. And this is going to be a virtual training that will be on May 16th. And you'll be able to register for that on our website at peacethroughaction.org/dialogues. And just to mention back to the April 21st event, that will be in person. So that will be in Calvert County, as opposed to the May 16th virtual training. Okay, so Graham is now going to tell us about some national dialogue events that are coming up in April.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jessica. So right now, my head is 99.9% on a regular basis about this huge annual campaign that we run. We held our first National Week of Conversation in 2018. When we had about 130 or so organizations across 32 states running in-person events. This was back at a time when Zoom really wasn't a thing that we used very often, particularly for these kinds of events. And since then, we've grown exponentially, with last year adding what we call a marquee or a kickoff event with the name America Talks to that National Week of Conversation. And the point of this event is to recruit and give an experience of bridging to people who've never heard of any of these organizations, but they might be exhausted by the toxic polarization. They might have lost friends or family members because of toxic polarization. They may feel a sense of not belonging because of COVID and or toxic polarization. And it's an opportunity for people to come and feel heard and feel like they have a place where someone will actually listen to their story without judgment. We run that America Talks event twice, once on the 21st, which because it overlaps with Peace Through Action, we'll say don't go to that one because you want to go to Peace Through Action's event. But you have a backup opportunity on April the 23rd to connect with either one other individual or a small group of individuals who likely are different from you in some way, shape, or form, whether it's demographically, psychographically, geographically, or otherwise. And then if you can't make either of those events, or even if you do, we also invite you to hundreds of other events and planned activities during National Week of Conversation that runs April the 24th through the 30th. Those events will all be posted on Citizen Connect, the website that Bob just talked about. So I'll say, if you're part of an organization, I saw one or two people in the chat say that they're part of an organization. We invite you to partner in this initiative, becoming either a promotional partner where you promote the campaign to your network, or a hosting partner where you additionally host an event during National Week of Conversation. If you're an individual, we welcome you to register for and attend the America Talks event, as well as to find those opportunities between April the 24th and April 30th to flex your bridge building muscles and learn how to, as we say, listen first a little bit better. So this is the primary resource, if you'll go to that next slide, Jessica, that we offer on a yearly basis, is a galvanizing and aggregating event campaign that allows us to celebrate the work of all these hundreds of bridge building organizations doing wonderful work in local communities as well as on the national level. Our other public facing opportunities, we have a pledge. You can sign that pledge to listen first. It'll also provide you a weekly inspirational email on Fridays. We call Fridays Listen First Fridays because that's when we send out that newsletter and lift up a voice. You won't want to miss this week because I do something silly on video. It's one of those weeks that I'll give you a little hint. It lands on April Fool's Day, so we're trying to play a little bit on what we might rebrand ourselves at Listen First Project if we were joking around a little bit about April Fool's Day. But you can follow that Listen First Friday. You can follow us on social media if that's your gig. If you're an organization that does this work, we invite you to join the Listen First Coalition. No financial obligations or any kind of really weird, memorandum of understanding that you have to sign and agree to do 10 tweets a week or anything. It really is just an opportunity to come together in community with other organizations that are doing this work. And then, of course, we want you to participate in those events, particularly those events that land between April 21st and April 30th.
And for us, we also have some resources to offer. And we've created a web page in our full website that's focused on dialogue, and that's at peacethroughaction.org/dialogues. So, for example, the recording of this session will be posted there, the PowerPoint presentation. We have some upcoming fact sheet type materials for quick reads for folks who want to do something about incivility and don't know where to start, or they want to understand a little bit more about dialogue and deliberation processes, and like, is there any proof that those work? Those kind of short and fast things for lay people. We also invite you to join our Peaceful Readers Book Club, because book clubs are another way to build relationships and bridge differences. Our upcoming book that we're reading together is called A Politics of Love, and it's an examination of and a response to the polarization currently affecting us. And anyway, the peacethroughaction.org/book club has information about those dates and how to register for that. And do consider the training on transformative facilitation that Jessica mentioned. It will be offered virtually, so anyone can participate regardless of where you live. And of course, follow us on social media too. We always welcome more followers, and you'll all be starting to receive our newsletter, and you'll get that hopefully you'll stay with us, but you are under no obligation to persist with that, and you have an unsubscribe button at the bottom, but we don't over flood your email boxes. So I hope Graham, Jessica, and I have established the imperative of listening as a critical ingredient to bridging differences. We aim to direct you to some steps you can take to join a dialogue in your community, or even lead a dialogue in your community if you find that wanting. And we've highlighted some of the resources that both of our organizations offer. And we both highly encourage you to participate in America Talks and the National Week of Conversation. To be clear, the America Talks is a virtual experience where you're connected to the other person or the small group through a technology. It's not Zoom, but it's like Zoom. So it's definitely something available to any of us from our own workstations or households. No one has to be on the road traveling to anywhere. And then, as Graham said, the National Week of Conversation is a set of events going across the country, and we hope you'll find one in your community or community near you. Looks like we do have time for some questions or comments. So Jessica, if you could open the mics. People who want to speak up to either ask a question, share a comment, offer an observation. If any of you have had experience in a dialogue process and want to share that with us about how that felt for you, what worked, what could be different, the floor is yours. So we'll give it the time it needs to let anyone speak up who wishes. I'll start just to make sure we, Graham, could you talk a little bit more about some of like the science that underlies civic dialogue? Like I've heard on the news recently, like there's some information, there's like a form of psychology or some information from psychology research that talks about like the actual being in the presence of others connects you in a way that causes you to let go of your biases and bigotries. Is that sounding familiar to you?
Yeah, so there are as many theories of change as there are organizations doing this work. And so there's probably also as many theories of what's happening in those events or in the minds of those participants. One of the main theoretical concepts that a lot of the dialogue groups in particular work within is called the contact hypothesis, otherwise known in some circles as like the mere exposure effect. In other words, contact with other people who are different or in part of your out group provides an experience, a direct experience or contact with a specific member of that group, which then begins to almost disallow you to stereotype and or judge those people because now those people, there's an actual sort of tangible instantiation of those people that you know, that you share certain values with, that is an actual person with actual experiences and feelings and a family and needs and all of these things, right? And so there's some pretty powerful work on simply having contact with other people that particularly in our world today, as segregated as it is, in terms of where we live, where we worship, where we shop, where we go to school, we don't have contact with people who are different from us. And in the advent of social media, where we can choose to listen to particular media sources and choose to follow particular social media accounts, that just exacerbates that effect. So social media didn't cause all of our problems, but it certainly hasn't helped in a lot of ways, in the ways that social media and the internet were supposed to be the great uniter, the ability to really reach across differences. And it still has that potential, but it's not often used that way. As you said at the beginning of this, social media companies have a responsibility that they're not always, coming to bear on, right? And so a lot of the groups in the Listen First Coalition work to make social media spaces more inclusive spaces and spaces where dialogue can actually happen. And we are in conversation with Facebook and Twitter as well. And parts of those organizations understand the problem, and other parts of those organizations probably work against that problem. And so it is a messy, wicket that we sit in. But I do believe that the contact hypothesis is probably what you're referring to, which is just contact with other people different from us can lower our perception gap, where we begin to understand that we're more similar than we are different.
Thank you. And I asked that was one example that I could think of, but I just want to assure our audience that what we're uplifting today has an evidence base under it. I'm not a big fan of, or at least Peace Through Action's not a big fan of promoting stuff that doesn't work. And so one way we try to do that, try to make sure we're uplifting things that do work, is to uplift things that have some research that underlies it. So just want to amplify that this wasn't all just hugs and kisses. I mean, hopefully there are hugs and kisses at some point involved in some of this when it's appropriate. But
I just printed off a manuscript, today called "The Interventions to Reduce Partisan Animosity." Right. So there's tons. There's research that comes out every day that supports different parts of the work that we do.
Thank you. And Ramon had his hand up, and I'm inviting him to speak up now if he wishes.
Thank you so much. Greetings, everyone, and good evening. Where's this organization calling from? Is it Maryland? Where are you guys based out of?
So Peace Through Action and Listen First Project are both national organizations, and we're headquartered in Washington, D.C., but operate virtually. And Listen First, I don't know where your business address is, but your team's all over the country also.
Our business address is in Raleigh or Durham, North Carolina, because that's where our CEO is, and that's where our paperwork is filed for our 501c3 status. But I'm in Oxford, Mississippi. We have people on the West Coast, on the East Coast, and in Ohio as well. So yeah, we're a distributed team that works remotely.
But to pick up, so the project that we highlighted is located in Maryland, and that's just one. We want to showcase of an example of a community really doing the work, rather than just Graham and I saying, "Oh, isn't this wonderful stuff?" But no one does it. We wanted to elevate that actual real people and real communities do this work with frequency.
Awesome. Well, I'm calling from Connecticut. I'm currently in the capital, which is Hartford. It attracted my attention when I seen, the email, or I don't know if it was a Facebook post or an email. I mean, because I'm really active in a lot of community work and criminal justice reforms. So I currently work with the Peace Center of Connecticut, working with at-risk youth at 2 middle schools. And I also advocate with CONCAN, which is a branch of 50CAN, a national organization that advocates for equal education for all kids, regardless of their zip code. So these conversations really sparked my interest. I first had a taste of it in 2019 at an implicit bias training when I was working with the ACLU in Connecticut, and it was a 3-day course at Central Connecticut State University in New Britain, Connecticut, and I never been amongst such a diverse group of people. Me being someone that is currently a convicted felon, you know, on parole. I went through a wrongful conviction about a decade ago, and that's what kind of led me to this journey, and trying to establish a balance and eradicate, injustices, especially those based off of race and wealth. And during that training, if it wasn't for that training, I would have never established a friendship with an assistant chief state's attorney. Being someone, a Puerto Rican, from, impoverished areas with a criminal background, I would have never been able to cross paths or, dialogue and establish a friendship with this assistant chief state's attorney had it not been for this 3-day training, unless if I probably went, before him as a defendant. And even though we're so, different, extremely different, as far as backgrounds, we ended up, having so much in common, and we established a friendship, and it was, extremely helpful. And I think that, conversations like this, will really contribute to making a difference in this country. And I applaud you all for it. And please send me any invitations or informations that you guys may have, in the future coming up, so that I can continue to benefit and be a part of this. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for your sharing about your life experience and how you just brought to all of our attention how you were able to bond with someone who had differences from you, and you now support each other and are allies. So yay. Also happy to know there's a peace center in Connecticut. I'm not shocked, but anytime I hear the word peace center, I make a special note, because those are the type of organizations that might find some affinity with Peace Through Action in our work. And tomorrow I'm going to go through that Citizen Connect database and see who in Connecticut might be doing some of this work that you may not know about already. And if I find a connection for you, I'll point it out to you by email so that you can introduce yourself to them. Not every, I wouldn't say, it's just the nature of things. Not every organization doing dialogue work is, hitting the New York Times or 60 Minutes story. So a lot of work just happening organically and really, really deep at the grassroots level. And it's no shame on any of us to not know that that's happening in our own communities. But Citizen Connect is a platform that a number of us are contributing our information into to help us find those those stealthy organizations doing the deep work.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.